Hey, welcome to the Art Condition Podcast, a weekly show that will discuss the business, community, and often undiscussed stress and mental health concerns of being a professional artist, or even a serious hobbyist. I'm Joby. I've been in the tattoo and illustration professions for 25 years. My co-host is Moose, a data analyst, social media manager, and art agent. If you enjoy the content, please consider visiting the Patreon page in the show notes to help support the effort. Or if that's not an option, please like, subscribe, leave a good review, or just share with your friends. And definitely go visit the links of our guests on this episode. Thanks for listening, and have a great day. This week we are talking to Larry Elmore. This episode doesn't need a lot of introduction. Larry himself needs none. If you're a fan of fantasy art, the chances are good that you know who he is. And if you can imagine yourself when you were 12 and you remember how inspired you were by the art that accompanied whatever form of entertainment you enjoyed most, you have an idea of how special it is for me to talk to Larry. Larry is one of the reasons I became a serious artist, and he remains a huge inspiration. Going into this episode, we knew that we would be short on time, so we kept it pretty relaxed and just let Larry tell his stories, which is exactly what you want from someone who has been in the business of fantasy illustration for as long as he has. One quick technical note, I apologize in advance on Larry's behalf. His studio was undergoing a renovation while we were talking to him, so you will hear some banging in the background. It's not too bad though, and I don't think it takes away from the conversation too much. Let's listen. And we'll say that we're on. And I will say to you, Larry, thank you so much for being here. This is an incredible honor. Never in my wildest dreams would I have thought that I would be sitting down to have a podcast interview with Larry Elmore. I don't want to blow too much smoke, or do too much fanboying, but I have to address the elephant in the room for me that this is a real treat. So thank you. And
thank you. That always embarrasses me.
Well, that's all right. That's all right. Just want to address the noise in the background for anybody that's going to be listening to this after the fact. You're going through a pretty decent sized studio renovation, so there might be a couple bangs and booms in the background. But we have to get it in where we can, and I appreciate it that much more that in the midst of a hectic turnover in your studio, you're giving us some time to do this. So if we can jump right into it, if anybody has been living under a rock for the past 40 years, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and a brief history of your career?
I live in Kentucky, and I moved back to the county I was born in. And my family, on both my mother's and father's side, has been here probably. Some of them relatives have been here since Kentucky, some before Kentucky was a state in this same area. So it is home. I know the county pretty well, and know a lot of people. And I just grew up. My dad got tuberculosis after World War II, but he survived it. But he almost died several times. But he died a few years ago at 93. So he done all right. but at that time when I was born, the day I was born, my dad had to go to a tuberculosis sanitarium. That was a place where they treated you, and really you go there till you die. And so since it was related to World War II, Mom got a check for like $50 a month, something like that, $55 a month. And we lived on that out in the country, little house. And at that time, electricity in Kentucky, this is 1949, 1950, the county had ran electricity out into the county. And so we lived in a house like other neighbors with no electricity, no running water. And we learned to entertain ourselves. We would go to clay bank. The soil here is a lot of clay, and get clay and make sculpt toys and animals and pass away the time. And then at night, when the house cooled down, uh, Mom would take the grocery bags, the old brown grocery bags, and cut them out, cut me one out real flat, flatten it out, and then I would draw on the grocery bag on the kitchen table under a kerosene lamp because we didn't have electricity. And I loved to draw. And then later on, Dad would get to come home for maybe a year. He'd get a job, and we'd start doing pretty good. And then he'd break down with TB again, be positive, and have to go back to the hospital again. So that went on for the first 9 years of my life, 10 years. And I was 10 or 11. I think they got at least the garage doors down. But so I was drawing all my life, and I lived in an area in a time where I was thinking the other day, anybody older than very old, like your grandma, grandpa, they were pretty old, and old men, women around, were probably born in the 1800s, and they would tell tales and stories and scary stories, and they just sparked my imagination, And people get together at night, bring a guitar, mandolin, a fiddle, and make music and sing and just under lantern light and in the summertime. And it was like a fantasy world in a way. Nobody worried so much about money or buying things as long as you had a roof over your head and food to eat, then enjoy life, and it was a neat. I wouldn't take nothing from my childhood. But as time went on, Dad got better. Dad was very intelligent, very well read, and he did well. And I mean, we weren't rich, but he got us up to average standard of living for Kentucky at that time, and we was doing okay. And then I wanted to go to college and major in art. So luckily, Kennedy they just passed a bill that for if you couldn't afford a college, to go to college, you could get loans and grants. So that's how I got to go to college, and loans and grants. And then done well in college. I was chosen for one of their top artists. They was working on a scholarship for me for Pratt to get a master's degree, but I knew I was going to be drafted, and I was. I got out of school in December of 70, and I was in the Army of January 71. So I was out of school for about a month before I was in the Army, and did 2 years in the Army, and a year in Germany, which I got to see castles and everything else. I got into fantasy art when I was in college, and called it adventure art. And there wasn't no such thing as fantasy art. This is even before I'd seen my first Frazetta painting. But I found some old books. We had a lot of old books. And some was illustrated by N.C. White, Treasure Island stuff. And I fell in love with the way he painted power and strength. And there was a sense of adventure in his paintings. And it's like, that just carried me away. And the way my life was, the woods was mysterious. Like when people would come up to play music at night on our porch, they would come from the woods. I was young. I thought they lived in the woods. I mean, we lived in the country, but there's a little bit of fields around us. There's woods, but what I realized, my mom kind of told me later on in life, because they knew us, but they were actually taking a shortcut. If they'd walked the highway, it'd have been 5 miles. But if they cut through the woods, it's about 1.5 miles. And so they didn't live in the woods under trees. They were just normal young people. And they looked like adults, but they were 17, 18, 19 years old. And but all that just added fantasy to my life. And the stories that old people would tell. And back then there was no central heating, you had a coal stove or a fireplace. You either burnt wood, burnt coal, and that was it, the heat. And to cook, you had a wooden stove in the kitchen. So in the summertime, you get 105 degrees, and you had to cook off a wooden stove in the kitchen, no air conditioning, no electricity, not if you couldn't run a fan. It was pretty miserable, but I don't know, it was just life. But all that added to fantasy. It's like I was living in a fantasy world. and to an extent, especially when you're innocent and you don't know that uh, the cruel realities of the world, and so, but that I think that sparked it all. And then when I was in college, I saw Frazetta's first coloring painting, and I flipped out. But I was already been looking and going to the library trying to find who lived in Europe. It's around the time of maybe the Romans or something, because they didn't teach you that in school, in high school, and in college. I've taken American history classes, even world history. They don't touch on that. They just start out with, you know, the Egyptians, the Romans, the Greeks. Goes up from there. They don't talk about Central Europe or England or Ireland. And so I was determined people live there. There's a Stonehenge up there. Been there a long time. So I'd go to the library and try to find it. Well, even in the books they labeled all of Europe, Northern Europe, as battle axe cultures. So they weren't classified as civilization. That came along later. But at that time, it's like they were nothing. They were just primitive civilization. And then I found the word Celts in a book. And I, okay, let's start tracing them. And finally, I still didn't find it in college, but I was found Vikings and got this little bit of that. And then later on, I found a book on Celts, and it was like after I got out of college, and it showed the Celtic designs and the weaponry and the shields, and I loved it, and I started incorporating that into my drawings. And when I went to TSR with Dragonlance, I told Jim Ralzoff was the head of the art department, really nice guy. His talent was lettering, unbelievable. And so Dragonlance had to be separate from Greyhawk, the world of Greyhawk. Um, and so how do we separate two fantasy worlds? And it's sort of hard, two fantasy worlds when everything goes. And I said, well, I brought a book into Jim Ralzoff, was Celtic design. And I said, when you do he was going to do the logo, Dragonlance, and I said, put a lance through it. And he said, that's a good idea. And I said, and this Celtic design, it'll separate it. If we keep this kind of design going, but nobody had heard of Celtic design. This is like an 81, 82, somewhere around in there. And I was trying to introduce people to that because I discovered it. And so we started trying to, or it didn't get incorporated enough in Dragonlance as I wanted it to be, because the Celtic design of everything, clothing and stuff, the design work was very unique, and they were a barbaric people, or however you want to consider it. They didn't build Rome or anything. They did a lot of fighting, and they were perfect kind of people for D&D, and and so, but we did incorporate some when we could. I tried to on the figures I painted for the first time. I tried to give it a little bit of a twist.
So was that your first professional occupation? Like aside from the military, was TSR your first professional gig?
No, it was well, I worked a lot of jobs going through college in summertime, all kinds of crazy jobs. And I left that one time and worked at a big printing company, running the big 4-color Heidelberg printers and everything. I got to understand printing and how it works. And that was helped me forever in my occupation, because everything I'd done was published or printed just about. But when I was in the Army, I spent 1 year at Fort Knox working as an illustrator. I was a soldier, but I was working as an illustrator in a building that they made Army manuals, everything from typesetting it to illustrating it to printing it and shipping it out. It was all done in this one building. And so I worked there a year as a soldier before I got sent to Germany. Well, they liked my work so much, and there was a lot of civilians working there too for civil service, and they paid quite well. And I come back, they said, when you go to the Army, do your portfolio and everything, and we'll try to get you a job here. And I did, and I got a job at Fort Knox in the same place I was. And this we're talking about. This is 10 years later, you might say, since I was in college and stuff. And some of the new illustrators we were interviewing as a year went on, or a couple of years went on, I started seeing some of them with fantasy art portfolios. Like, oh, that's great. Some fantasy art people. I wasn't the only crazy person out there. And well, by the time I got to the Army, there was Boris who'd come along, and I always liked Jeff Jones's work that was publishing back in the 60s. Uh, uh, Bernie Wrightson's, I followed all Bernie Wrightson stuff. Some of those guys were the core right then in the 60s. And when I got to the Army in 71, there had been new people, of course. Vallejo had come on the scene and a few others. And so I worked at Fort Knox, and I got up to a GS9 making back then in 73, 74, 74, 75, I guess, somewhere around in there. I was making about 20,000 a year, which was, well, I kept getting raises. I got around 20-some thousand a year. And at that time, that'd be like making 80,000 a day, just about. I'd bought a new house, and I got published in National Lampoon on the side while I was working at Fort Knox. And then heavy metal. I got published some in heavy metal. And I guess that's where TSR must have saw my work. And they called me at work and wanted me to do a freelance job for them. So I did. And they liked it. And then I'm trying to make this short. Then they asked me to, to work for them, to move to Wisconsin. I'm like, no, I just bought a new house. I'm happy. And so I told them that a couple of times. They flew me up there to let me see the company. Well, that scared me even worse because I was like 32 and most of the people was like 18, 19, and 20. The only person who's older than me was Gary. I met him. I'm like, well, there's one dude older than me. And then 2 or 3 more that was my age, a little bit older. And they showed us everything really nice. And I thought, man, it'd be a great place to work. It seemed very creative. But we had 2 kids by then. And I said, well, I can just keep freelancing and work on Fort Knox. It's steady money. And so I told them no again. So then the president of the company, which I think was Brian Bloom, or Keith Bloom, Kevin Bloom, I think. He was a lawyer and he was president at the time. They would rotate who was president of the company. And he flew down to my house and I picked him at the airport, and being good Southerners, we fixed him a big supper. We call it supper. We don't call it dinner, not in the South. Fixed him a good supper. And after he ate, my wife got out cake and coffee, and sort of sat back and talk about business. Well, he just turned right around at me and said, we want to hire you really bad. He said, how much do you make at Fort Knox? I said, 20,000 a year. He said, well, double it. I'm like, God bless. I mean, double it. But I stayed cool. I'm like, I said, my wife works. And she was a good secretary, typist, everything of that kind of stuff. And she was working for City Hall. And he said, how much she makes? I said, she makes 12,000 a year. At that time, 12,000 a year for a woman was pretty good money. And he said, well, double it. He said, she could work for us. We got plenty of jobs like us. So I'm like, that's $64,000 or $62,000. And I freaked out. I looked at my wife. She gave me this look like awestruck is beyond her. So I was looking for a sign like yes or no. And she sort of like gave me a little bit of a forward nod. And I said, well, what about this house? We just bought it. I'm going to do. He said, we'll either buy it and sell it for you, or we'll just take it over and sell it for you. Don't worry about it. And we'll have a place waiting for you when you get there. I'm like, I guess you just bought yourself an artist. And about a month later, I was moving to TSR, and they had a house rented waiting for me. And they were super nice. So I really felt obligated to them, and I did the best I could. And I worked. My average day was about 16 hours a day, probably. I'm not just at TSR to come home and work till 3 in the morning. Two was about my normal bedtime, and sometimes all nighters. But I enjoyed it, and I didn't think it was bothering me. I mean, I drank black coffee and smoked cigarettes, and that kept me going. I was wired 24 hours a day. So no wonder later on I've had 3 heart attacks. I finally had quadruple bypass surgery. I had 1 stroke. I've never stopped painting through it all. And
Oh man.
I just had quadruple bypass about a little over a year ago, and the doctor he said, "Well, you're fixed up pretty good." He said, "I think I bought you 15 more years." I said, "I'll take it, man." And I
That's a
don't
whole
know.
other career.
Yeah, it is, man. All those, but here's what's getting me, man. I can't paint as long as I used to.
Mhm.
Of course, I'm 72 years old, but after I get in a good 8 hours, I'm pretty much shot, just sort of brain dead. And I'm complaining. My wife's looking. I said, "You're not a young man anymore. You're an old man." I said, "Well, in my mind, I'm the same age I always was. It doesn't
Well, if it
change."
makes you feel better, a lot of artists today feel exhausted after 8 hours of work, like that they're spent after that anyway.
Yeah.
So
I
it's
feel
Or not,
real
or
good
not
about
even 8 hours. Sometimes it
it.
doesn't even take someone 8 hours to get. I work 4 hours sometimes. I'm like, I gotta take a break. Gotta take a walk or something.
If I worked 4 hours, the rest of the day, I'd be lost. I wouldn't know what to do. I really wouldn't know what I would end up drawing. I draw from homes. Um,
One of the
I don't
questions that
know.
we had originally intended to talk to you about was burnout.
Yeah.
I don't know if we need to cover that too much more. You sort of addressed it, but it sounds like
Well,
you
I
don't.
guess
You're either immune to it or you don't notice the effects.
I think I worked through it all so many years. I don't know what burnout is. I'd work till I collapsed just about. And then you get about 4 hours sleep. Man, I'm ready to go again. You're charged. And I loved it. And there was much else I'd rather do than to do art. And um, I never got tired of it. Sometimes I call it hitting the wall. I tell my wife, I said, I've hit the wall. And she's like, "Well, it's about time." It's like, I'm totally exhausted. I just got to sleep. And then maybe I would sleep for 10 hours, 12 hours sometimes. On a weekend, lots of times, just sleep. And I sort of recharge my batteries, and I can run that way for another week.
did you ever have repetitive use injuries like tendonitis in your hands or cramping or anything like that?
Yeah. I've had to have my shoulder, my right shoulder. I used to get cortisone shots in it. Now I found out that that's not good for you. It deteriorates your cartilage. And so the last time it was about 3 years ago. I couldn't pick up a cup of coffee. I couldn't raise my right hand, even with my chest. Um, I had coffee sitting over on the table, and I couldn't pick it up. I'd use both hands to help me get over it, and I just couldn't paint. And so I didn't want cortisone shots. But I had a friend that was a chiropractor. Well, to be honest, I didn't believe too much in chiropractor. I'd gone to one time, and he didn't do nothing for me. I said, well, this friend of mine, he was my age, and he was a millionaire because he had like 6 businesses, chiropractor businesses, scattered in Kentucky. And I was talking to him one time. He said, "The reason I'm doing it because I love chiropractor like you do art." He said, "I can heal a person." And he said, "That's my life." And so I thought, okay, I'll give him a shot, because here I was, my left arm was hurting because I had a habit of leaning on a chair arm. I eventually took all the arms off my chair, so I couldn't do that in the studio. But I leaned on this arm, so I blew this shoulder out. I painted with this one, and was blowing this shoulder out, but this one's worse. And I also had a hump on my back. It's called the illustrator hump. I don't know. It was just bundles of nerves. It's this hump getting bigger. I think there's even a Dragon magazine thing where I couldn't make the issue, and I just did a one-page thing. And I think somewhere I put a little arrow and pointed the illustrator hump on the back of my neck. Well, anyway, I started going to chiropractor. And my God, he healed me. He said, we might have to work on you for a year. I said, I'll do it, whatever it takes, because I got to pay. Within 3 weeks, my right shoulder, everything was great. And he didn't really work on my left that much, just a little bit. And I went to him for almost a year. The illustrator hump went away. Now I could turn my head all the way around, look behind me. Um, it worked. A good chiropractors know what they're doing. But like he said, there's a lot of flaky ones out there. You got to get, he said, like everything else. He said, well, he knows me. And he said, there's a lot of so-called artists out there. A lot of them are not very good, but some are really good. He said, all life's that way. I said, okay, I believe you now, man. And but yeah, he's kept me painting. If it wasn't for him in the last several years, I would have had to quit.
And that is relieving to hear that you
there's hope if you get the right guy.
yeah. One that, it didn't, because some of that stuff that you're talking about could have been career ending. So it was sort of fortunate and fortuitous. Yeah. That you met the right person at the right time.
Yeah. When you can't raise your arm up
to
get a cup of coffee, and then you can't pick the coffee up. The pain is so bad. You can't paint, can't draw.
Yeah. So your career has, been around longer than the internet has been around. I mean, that's to say that the internet hasn't been around for very long.
I don't know. It's new to me.
Yeah. Or, certainly, what the internet has become today. And one of the things that the internet is sort of known for, the cornerstone of the internet is social media. And one of the unfortunate consequences of social media is this ability for people to share their just toxic hatefulness with the world. And will really try and like drag people down. They'll say negative things, and artists deal with this a lot, where we have to sort of navigate this minefield of negativity.
Yeah.
Did you ever have to deal with anything like that?
A little bit. I think what happened to me, I was at the right place at the right time, for one thing. And I did some of the right covers at the right time. Okay. And I blame that on luck and also skill too. I mean, I was the right one being chosen at the right time to work at TSR. Somehow, I don't know how the heavens were working it all out or whatever, And so I happened to be several times at the right place, right time, and I got to do very popular products. And I didn't get a lot of negativity. I'd run into it sometimes on the fringes, and I had some friends were artists that would get down. And artists can get depressed pretty easily, and you can live on high highs and low lows because your art is you. When people come by and just like, well, that sucks. What does that do to your soul? It crushes a little piece of it. And if you get that negative feedback all the time, it's horrible. And I think one lucky thing too, during those years, what was rare about TSR, most companies like that would have freelanced all their art out. So none of the artists would have ever known each other personally, really. TSR brought all the artists under one roof. So we were all working together. And most of back then there was no email, so there was people send fan mail. We was all getting fan mail. And it was all praise. And it's from kids playing D&D, and they loved it, and they loved their art. And we understood that, and we helped each other's spirits. Sometimes we get down just ourselves. Artists can be moody, and but we build each other up, and we were sort of in a protective shell. I didn't realize it then how lucky we were. I really didn't. And now I always try to be as nice to all the fans as I possibly could. Nice to everybody. If they like my work, I love you. Okay. That means you like me to some degree. And I've tried to go out of my way to be as nice to people as and that's real feelings, not fake. Really, I like people. I like talking to people and learning new things. And I've been fortunate in my art's taken me all over the world, place I never dreamed I would go. I met people I never dreamed I would meet. I mean, it's been like this weird dream. And it wasn't that I was rich through all this. No, starving artist is a true. When I went freelance, I realized what a real artist was. So I went freelance in the 80s, moved down back to Kentucky, and because my wife and I both, like I said, we got families been here forever, and my wife's she's Catholic from a big family of brothers and sisters, so we moved back here and built a house. Then the work that reality was setting in more and more. It's like, man, you only get paid by every painting you do, and you better use your brain to figure out other ways to make money, make this art work for you. So I started getting printers to make prints. Finally built up the big Epsons, really good ones. And I just tried to market myself, tried to stay happy. I went through major depression a couple of times, almost suicidal. And but I got through it. And I think the fans helped me with their letters and things, and my family, and I just I was comes in a time the old saying was pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You gotta keep going, and I did. And but people have been nice to me, and I've tried to be nice. I hope I haven't offended anybody out there. Stay politically neutral publicly, and in real life, I'm pretty neutral on all this stuff. I just look at, let's just try to find the truth of things. I don't care how you feel about things, but what's the truth? That's all that interests me. And it's weird me saying this. I want my life to understand reality and truth as much as possible, but I paint in a fantasy world. So I guess maybe it bounces out some way. I don't know. I live in a fantasy world, but I also live in reality. And when everything was going digital painting, I told my wife, I said, be prepared for some hard times. And she said, well, times are not that great now. I said, well, it's going to get worse. She said, why? And I said, I'm not going to go digital. She said, why not? I said, I don't want to paint digital. I like the smell of paint. I like the texture of paint. I like everything about paint. I like doing it by hand. You're feeling it, draw with a pencil, ink with a brush or a pen, paint with a brush. I said, if I had to stop doing that, somebody made me go digital, I said, I'd quit doing art. I'd probably try my hand at writing. I don't know. I'd do something else. And so I said, I'm going to stay painting. And I said, the other thing, I said, now these little kids that played D&D back then, they're 14, I'm 35. And I said, they're grown up. They were smart kids. I know a lot of them right now are doctors, lawyers, and everything else. They're making money. And I said, when you started collecting art, you don't collect prints. I mean, you can collect prints or postcards or whatever. But if you got the money to collect original art, these people have the money. And right now, fantasy art was in its infancy back then. And you could buy great paintings cheap, a couple of grand. You get your Dragonlance painting, the original. And because that helped me sustain my livelihood. I didn't want my kids to suffer and to be poor. And so I always maintained a certain good level of living. No matter if I worked myself to death, I wanted my family and my wife and everything to have a good life. And so, but yeah, we had about 5 years, sort of rough. I went to a lot of conventions, selling a lot of prints that kept us going. And then people started wanting the original paintings. And the collectors started like, oh, okay, if it was original art. And I'm like, well, here, I'm still painting with a brush. And so, man, it really broke loose. And my paintings are going, if I'd had all those old paintings I sold, I would be a rich man. But I sold them all to live. you know. I've got about 10 or 15. I got about 10 or 12 ones I kept because I liked them. And there was more, but I had to sell some that I really loved over the years, just to pay the bills. Something comes along, like in all families, something you aren't prepared for. You need another 5,000 now. So I sold the painting. I sold two to get 5,000. Yeah.
Well, this idea of having a positive attitude, looking to your fellow artists for support, especially in the hard times, of which you have seen many ups and downs. Over the course of that, though, have you met any of your heroes? And if so, did any of those encounters ever not go so good? You don't have to name names, but just curious.
Well, there's two things that stick out to me. One's sort of negative and one's sort of positive. The positive thing, Frazetta was still alive when I was working at TSR. And I always thought, I want to meet him because he changed my life. Those first Conan covers changed my life because I realized I didn't have to paint desert scenes of Indians in it or something. I could open my mind up and the world, the barbarians, everything. You could Egyptian stuff, everything. You can just go, you can play with it all. So his art opened my mind. And I loved his art. But I thought, the guy never knew me. I never met him. It would have made my life if I could have met him, But I was afraid to meet him. What if he didn't like my art and said something that would crush my soul? So I didn't really go really out of the way to meet him, but I wish I could have just happened to see him and shake his hand. That's all, run away. Well, the guy that did Mike Freelander, he did trading cards, art for artists. You all remember a few years ago, a lot of artists were doing cards, collector cards. They do, okay. So Freelander was publishing a lot of times that he published my cards. And he would take them over, different artists. And he lived pretty close to Frazetta in Pennsylvania. And he would drive over to Frazetta's house and talk to Frazetta. They were friends. And Mike was my age or younger. So Frazetta was treating him more like a nephew or something, age-wise. But he said one thing about Frazetta, he was very vocal on if he liked the artist or if he didn't like the artist. Mike would show him a set of cards. I don't like his art. He's not getting the point. He's not doing it. And Mike said he was tough, but a lot of artists he was knocking was really good artists. And said, but he was really, he liked what he liked. He said, so I brought him over a set of your cards. He said, I had a box of cards, all of them, and they was still shrink wrapped. And he said, I brought you some of Elmore's cards. And Mike was telling us, he said, Frazetta looked at me, he said, now I like that boy's work, that Elmore. He said, he knows what he's hitting the right chord or hitting the right spirit or something. And he said, set that box over on the mantle, or on the dresser, whatever it was. He said, bring me another box so I can look through it. And so he brought him another box. And he said, you were one of the few of the artists he produced that Frazetta liked. And I wasn't trying to copy Frazetta, when I was in college, I did one piece in pastels trying to copy his art. And I stopped and said, you can never beat a guy's own game. I can't outdo Frazetta. I can be a shadow. I can be a copy. But I want to be whoever I am. And I don't know what my style is. I'll just keep going and it'll develop. And that's what I did. I never tried to be like anybody. I was influenced by N.C. Wise, Frazetta, and a few other artists, a lot of them, but at that time. So you're like a sponge, you absorb everything, and then it comes out you. The time I was the most dejected, there was certain artists that I was aware of his art, loved his art. I actually own a couple of his black and whites, about 4 of them. And I was learning to ink. I really wanted to ink better. And when I worked at Fort Knox, everything was done in ink. So I want to be able to the ink with pens and brushes, just as great as like this particular artist. And he was about my age, because I remember reading when I was in college, I was looking at his art. And Jeff Jones, another one that really influenced me. But anyway, I was looking at this artist. This is not Jeff Jones. I was looking at this artist's work, and I realized he was so good. He got publishing jobs when he got out of high school, 17. And, when I was 17, I went to college. And anyway, I was at Dragon Con one year. And this is several years ago. And I had my little table set up. I'm going to sell some stuff. I noticed he had a table about 3 tables down from me, but he wasn't there. He was one of the special guests. And I wasn't a special guest. I was paying my own way. But I thought, oh my God, I get to meet him. I actually get to meet him. And every once in a while he'd stroll by. Once a day he'd stroll by to this booth. He'd set a big line with form and he would sign stuff, and then they'd disappear. He just shut it off. He had long hair, cool leather jacket kind of thing, and so boots. And this good looking girl was always with him. On, oh my God, he's just God, he's just cool. So I got the courage to go down and see him. So he was sitting there. I went to him and said, my name's Larry Elmore. I got a booth up next to your, 2 booths up. And he's just looked at me. And this good looking girl was sort of hanging on him. And I said, I've always loved your art. You're the greatest inker and penciler and everything in the world. I love your work, love your work. And he just blew me off like I was nuts. I was a fan. I wasn't talking about art. I was a fan of his. But he was rude. And so I went back to my table just dejected. And that same time I met Jeff Jones the next day. Jeff Jones, the nicest person in the world. He just talked and talked. And there was a line he would like tell him, or somebody waiting behind this guy, but he was really great. I'm like, I worship Jeff Jones now more than ever. But that artist, it really killed something in my soul. And I didn't buy any more of his art. I still liked his inks. You couldn't help it. There's inking and drawing. And I didn't really see him hardly at all. If I didn't see him in the convention, I just ignored him. I didn't want to get hurt again. And so after 30 some years, I guess, I was going to a convention in Texas. And the guy picked me up at the airport. And I hopped in his car, put my suitcase in. He said, we got to pick one more guest up. I was sitting in the front seat. So we driving around the airport to go to another gate. I said, who are you picking up? And he said his name. I went, oh God, I don't want to talk to him. What I do? He gets in the car, and I didn't turn around. I just sort of waved. That's it. And the driver, he was talking to him, good flight, yeah, blah, blah, blah. So he's driving about 15 minutes, and the guy said, Larry, is that you up there? I thought, how does he even know my damn name, And this was probably 10 years, 12 years ago. And he said, is that you? I said, yeah. And he said, I always liked your work. You're doing really good work. And this guy, same age as me, but he'd been in the business before I had. But he looked rough. He wasn't the same guy. He could tell he wasn't really healthy. And by the time we got to the hotel, I felt sorry for him. And but I'm glad that happened, and we talked. And I told him that, yeah, I've always loved your work since I was a kid. And we was both kids, same age, but since I was in college. But that's been the worst I was ever hurt. But it come out okay in the end. And the greatest thing is that I actually like my work. And those 2 things, I don't know, it just worked out for me. It just made my life more complete or happier or whatever. But I've never, because of that incident, I was never rude to a fan, ever. If I was, it was accidental. It was a misunderstanding, but because I know what it felt like. And I didn't want anybody to feel that way. If they like your work, be happy. Be happy somebody likes your work besides yourself. Well, half the time you don't like your own work that much. I don't.
Yeah, it makes me wonder sometimes when people are, not being nice about it. Maybe that's just a reflection of, they're overcompensating
Yes,
for something that they don't like about themselves. But
it's something.
yeah, something, for the people that are watching, something that they really wanted to know when you mentioned that you had kept a few of your paintings, some of your favorites. They wanted to know which ones those were.
Well, it was called Eyes of Autumn, which was a Dragon magazine cover. It's a witch and a scarecrow. It's on tour right now. It's an Norman Rockwell Museum. They're having some kind of fantasy art tour. I'm not going to get that painting back till 2023, I think. Then Aveline, the Life Giver. That was a Dragon magazine cover. It was a giant walking away in the snow and a girl trying to heal a guy. I've got that one. I've got another Dragon mag. The reason why Dragon magazine covers is they would just give me a topic, and I was free to paint what I wanted to. And so I love doing Dragon magazine covers. And so like the other one, it was about magic weapons, and that's one that there's like this stone there and a sword floating, and there's like a Viking guy, barbarian guy, just sort of touching this floating sword with a stick. You want to touch it, and then there's two other characters around there. They were sort of down in a ruin, like in a hole where this is at, and some of those were my best paintings that time. And some of those, like Eveline, I was looking at that painting the other day, and I thought, sometimes you're painting out of your gourd. You're painting too good. You're painting a level beyond what you're capable of. That happens a few times in your life. I don't know what makes it happen. But I was looking at that painting and even get really close, looking at brush strokes and everything else. I don't leave a lot of big brush strokes. I just looking at how it was painted. I'm like, if I painted that today, I couldn't have painted any better. And there's about 3 or 4 paintings I've known, and some of them I don't. Some of them are gone. But I know that if I painted today, I couldn't do any better. And we're talking 30 years later of the experience and stuff. And but sometimes you were just, well, I guess I was painting so much, it's almost like getting on a high. And something builds up, and all of a sudden you turn out painting. It's like, even when I painted that, I looked at it like, holy cow, how did I do that? It was like you was having a dream, and you finally woke up and like, I didn't paint that, did I? Now I wasn't doing drugs or nothing. You can't do drugs and crank out that much work. I didn't even drink back then. The only time I drank was at a party, social drink. That was it. So I always stayed sober all the time. And I was smoking and drinking coffee, black coffee. That's doing more damage than anything, I guess, over the years. But yeah, sometimes it's just been, I look back and like, some paintings like, how did that happen? And how did I get that idea? I don't know.
Well, Harry,
I don't think of myself as, I don't think people treat me too good. And I don't think of myself as that. I just think of myself as a guy that's worked really, really hard, come from a good family that worked hard, big work ethics, look for the truth. Don't judge anybody till you know who they are. Don't be prejudiced about anything until you understand what's going on. Those kind of things is the rules I followed. And I worked with this old Mexican guy at Fort Knox. Loved him. He's retired Army. And I learned more from him about life than anybody just about. But a lot of his sayings I find myself saying today. And one of them I say the most. And let's see, when I'm doing a painting sometimes, you don't know, you're trying to paint something you know how to paint. I mean, that sounds stupid, but you know what you want in your mind, but you know how to paint it. And Oscar was his name. He'd always say, do your best and guess the rest. And he said, but do your best and then guess the rest. And so that's been my philosophy. When I'm doing a painting, I do my best, and then if it's beyond my comprehension, or by my experience, it's like, I'm just going to guess goes this direction. And you'll know soon enough if you guess wrong. Instead of looking at that crap, like, oh, back up now. Let's go another direction. But do your best and guess the rest. And that's what I've always tried to do with people, with art. and life, I guess. And I always thought of myself just average guy. Like life is like a battlefield, and there's shells going and bombs going on. You're going through life, and you see some of these old films and stuff where there's having a battle. How does anybody survive that battlefield? But there's those lucky ones that just don't really. They get grazed and they get knocked down or fall in a hole, but they get up and keep going. That's the majority of people. And with me, I just like I missed a lot of big bullets. I missed a lot of bombs. I got winged a few times, but all in all, kept running full speed. And the goal was just to do one good painting. And I think you'll never know when you do that one good painting until after it's done and you're looking backwards. The people say, you're going to do a masterpiece? And no. For all I know, I might have already done my masterpiece. I don't know if it'll get any better or what. And but that's sort of my philosophy on life.
Larry, you had mentioned before we started that you were going to be a little short on time. I don't know where you're at now. Do you have time for a couple more questions, or do you have to get going?
Hey, Betty. My wife was in here a minute ago. Now she's gone. Okay, let's do one more anyway.
Sure. No, not at all. That's awesome. Well, I guess I'm curious to know, you talked about working 16 hours, even 8 hours for a lot of people is a long time. And we've talked, before the recording a little bit, and how you can get into these zones, these states of mind where you're just like, you're forgetting everything, what's going on around you. And that can be tricky for some artists to get into that state of mind and that kind of focus and attention with their work. Do you have a process for getting into that zone, or have you just always sort of naturally been prone to that?
I can tell you my habits.
Yeah.
I come every morning and I got my black coffee and I sit in front of my painting. And usually I don't feel like painting, I mean, if it's like, how do you feel? Like, well, I'll go back to bed or I'll go do something else. But I sit there and I look at it. And I just look at where I'm at, what I got to do, what might be wrong already. I don't think about, I've got to start painting this morning. I don't enter my mind. I'm just looking at painting. And sometimes you come to realize, I don't know what happens. You don't even realize it, but you're painting. Okay. I look at it and somewhere in the process, I've started painting. And without really knowing it, or that happened to me a lot when I just leave the palette out and cover it up and I just started into it, but now I'm trying to be a little bit neater with that. But I'll sit there and I say, I don't feel like painting. And I'm looking at the painting, and then all of a sudden I'm mixing paint. And I'm like, I start. And then I just didn't want to stop. And there's one more level that you could get into, and it was real rare. Maybe 10 times in my life it happened. And if you've been painting for like 4 hours, and nobody's bothered you, you're just like, my wife worked when we moved back here. She worked for City Hall again. She's working, the kids are at school. I'm here, got everything locked up and signs of, Larry's gone, don't disturb me or something. And you'll be painting and you're getting deeper into it. And all of a sudden, there's a name for this, I can't remember what it is, but something clicks. You're almost having an out-of-body experience. You're watching yourself paint. And you're reaching over, hitting all the right colors. They're mixing perfect colors. And it's like your body went on automatic. The painting took over, or the painting part of you. And you're almost like your consciousness is back away from you and you're watching it happen. And you're even thinking like, this is so cool. Don't ever stop, but you don't think of it too much or you'll quit. You're in a zone, and it's like there's like an alpha waves or something happens. And it takes a lot so many like hours or so of concentration, and you get there. And you get in this zone. But anything can break it. Doesn't take much So somebody just knocks on the door, rings the bell, walks in, talks to you. It's gone. It's over. And they're still working on the studios. But that was the 2 levels. One was just the painting would pull me into it. I'd start painting every day. I didn't have to dread it. I just sit there. In a way, you could be dreading it, but before long, you're just painting with hardly realizing you're at it. And the other one's when you paint a long time, nonstop, then you get in the zone, and it's like your sort of consciousness is floating over you or something. And it's not like I'm looking down at me or any of that kind of stuff, but it's like your awareness seems to be separated from what you're doing. I don't know. It's just, and I've talked to a few people that get some zones like that, and they say it's great. But anything, a loud noise, you got to stop and look around. It's gone. You're out of it. And it takes hours to get there. But that's really neat. I haven't experienced that in a while because too much going on all the time. You got to have a good 4-hour run at no interruptions, and then to get to that zone, whatever it is.
And there are so many opportunities for interruption, more so these days than ever. Well, I know that you had said just one more question, but can I slip in a quick, it's a yes or no one.
All right.
Did you ever play D&D?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I would like to play more, but it's too time consuming. I got painting is time consuming. So I had 2 things I love to do, but both required a lot of time. So I chose painting. But I like D&D. Loved it.
All right.
We ran about a 4-year campaign when I worked there.
Oh.
All the artists. Yeah.
Well, that's a fantastic piece of history, Larry. We won't keep you anymore. Really, we appreciate it so much, Larry. I won't push my luck, but maybe we could do it again in the future.
Yeah, maybe be calmer and not so much going on.
Yeah,
and
sounds.
Yeah, that'd be good.
All right. Well, fantastic. Right on, man. Well, I'm going to wave goodbye to you, say thank you again, and I wish the best for you.
All right. You guys take it easy.